Welcome to the Legal Insurrection podcast. Today is May 16th, and this is episode 27. My name is Kimberly Kay with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and I'm here with our president and founder, Professor William Jacobson, and we have a lot to discuss today. It's been a while since it's just been the two of us, and not for neglect. We've just been very, very, very busy with all kinds of good and wonderful things, which is what I want to start off by talking about this morning. We've been very busy on the EP. Would you like to tell people what our most recent victory was, or I guess benchmark?
So earlier this week, we filed at equalprotect.org, Equal Protection Project, our 100th challenge to a university or college, or I should say, we challenged the 100th university or college, comprising 71 actual legal cases, because some involve more than one university. And so that's a big benchmark for us. We have now challenged discriminatory programs at 100 colleges and universities. We have comprised in those 100 challenges, because many involve multiple programs and scholarships, over 400 programs and scholarships that have been challenged. And this is all in 2 years. So we're very proud of that. And I think it's one of the reasons we've now been widely recognized in mainstream media, conservative media, liberal media, left-wing media, as really the leader in challenging these discriminatory programs and scholarships nationally. So we're very happy about that and proud that we've gotten to that moment.
So, for those who may not be completely aware of what these legal challenges look like, of what the Equal Protection Project is and what we do there, can we talk about that for just a tiny bit, because I think that's really important, especially given that we finally have a friendly administration and we are much busier now than we were even before.
Yes, post-inauguration 2025 has been the busiest we've ever been. Okay, we're filing basically 2 legal challenges a week, up from 1 a week, 1 every 2 weeks in prior years. And what we do at Equal Project, most of what we do are filing civil rights complaints at the Office for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. We have filed other sorts of legal complaints, and we expect that there will be more avenues for us this coming year now that we have a friendly administration. But that's mostly what we've been doing. We combine that with a very intense media push, and in many times the universities are shamed into changing their programs. In approximately half of our cases, that is the initial result, that the university changes its program, removes the discriminatory barriers. We have a lot that are still pending, so we don't know the results there. But of the ones that have concluded, of the cases we filed in the last 2 years that have concluded, come to a resolution, almost all of them have resulted in the university changing its programming and removing the barriers. In a handful of cases, they actually terminated the program or scholarship. That's not our primary goal. Our primary goal is to get the students the money from the scholarships, but to open those up on an equal basis without regard to race or color or ethnicity or sex. Most of ours have involved racial and ethnic discrimination, but increasingly we're filing sex discrimination cases also. And I think that's going to be an area of expansion for us. I think we'll also be doing more in the K through 12. We have filed K through 12 cases with great success. One of them against the Providence City School District has resulted in the Department of Justice opening a formal investigation. So that's a big step. Ithaca City School District, the Department of Education has opened a formal investigation. And I think we'll be doing more on public school districts, although our focus to date has been higher ed. We do have a major lawsuit pending against the state of New York for a program that runs at 56 colleges and universities to provide programming for high school and middle school students. That's pending in the Northern District of New York Federal Court. We've already survived a motion to dismiss, and we think we'll be victorious there. You never know. I can't predict things, but we're very solid ground. And we're always looking to bring lawsuits as well, but we're very cautious about those because they're time consuming and they're expensive. But I think you can foresee us doing more in the lawsuit realm moving forward. And of course, having a friendly administration, it feels kind of strange to us because we've always had a hostile administration, at least as long as Equal Protection Project has existed for 2.25 years. Now we have people who are willing to look at it, people to talk to, people who are on the same page as us as to the destructive nature of DEI discrimination in higher ed. I should make a distinction. We don't challenge programs merely because they're DEI. We only challenge them where there's a civil rights violation. And that's how we're a little bit different. We think that we want to be on very firm legal ground. I'm not saying we won't challenge things under the executive orders in the future, merely based on DEI, but we haven't so far. That's what the Equal Protection Project does. We added our first full-time attorney late last year. We're looking to hire another full-time attorney. Of course, we have part-time attorneys who've been there since the start, including me. And
I was going to say, and
adding,
you, our fearless leader, don't sell yourself short. So,
and
and
that's
I mean,
Equal Protection Project.
well, and we have a couple of stats here, and I want to kind of wrap this up by sharing these two. So far, the total number of programs that we have challenged is 412. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, that's in 2 years and 2 months with nothing but part-time help, with the exception of these last 4.5 months. Okay. And so far, we've tracked 71 what we consider wins or impacts. And it's not because so many cases have been closed without, any change. It's because they're all pending. Most of them are currently pending because we've had a new administration come in, and the previous administration was in no hurry to adjudicate these things or look into them at all. So they've all just been sitting for 2 years. So those are things that we're very proud of, um, not just to toot our horn, but it's something I know you'll hear me say all the time, is that you start small and you start doing what you can in your sphere of influence. And at least with the Equal Protection Project, we knew we had to take action. We knew we needed to do more. We started with part-time help, and now this whole thing, I wouldn't say it's snowballed because that's not the right analogy, but it's like a boulder rolling downhill, and that we just keep picking up steam because we started small. And so again, and I'll just throw in my little spiel here instead of at the end. In whatever way you're able to do things, it doesn't have to be at the federal level. Just find something in your sphere of influence that you can start chipping away at positively. So I'm really, really proud of the work that we have done there. And I'm really excited about everything ahead with the Equal Protection Project too. And it's really an honor and a privilege to be part of this kind of work with where we are right now, because my kids are small and I'm looking down the road wondering, number one, if college even exists in the way that it does right now, what that's going to look like for them, how we prepare. And so the fact that we're able to actively engage in ensuring that our standards of equality, which is not the same as equity, are upheld, and that there's accountability there. That's really important to me, that all of these institutions, big and small, because no one is immune. I mean, we have filed complaints against community colleges, against teeny tiny places, because if you are in violation or if you were violating the Equal Protection Project, you're fair game. It doesn't have to be just Harvard or, another large, very well-known institution. If you are doing wrong, you better get yourself in shape and reconsider your ways, because as we find these things and as we're alerted to them, we do take action where it makes sense. So anyway, yay us, pats on the back, not just for the hard work, but more importantly for the change that we really hope that this pushes in the long run, because this is definitely a marathon. This is not one of those things that will be over. We hit 200 complaints that we filed. Oh, yay, now DEI and discrimination's over. It doesn't work like that. We've talked about that and written about that extensively, but every little bit makes a big difference down the road. So moving on to actual newsy things, not just the stuff that we're doing, which is news for us, but let's talk about the Supreme Court and the upcoming birthright citizenship issue, because that's something that I think they've danced around a little bit and can no longer avoid.
Yeah, I listened to the oral argument yesterday. So it's birthright citizenship. It's whether anybody born on the soil of the United States automatically becomes a citizen. And that's the way it's been treated really for at least 100 years. But the question is that really what the Constitution says? Is that what the 14th Amendment says when it talks about any person, and I'm paraphrasing here, born, uh, you know, on our territory and subject to our jurisdiction is a citizen? Now, the 14th Amendment, certainly that provision was meant to make sure that freed slaves were citizens of the United States. Nobody was thinking, we're going to have Venezuelan gangs come here 150 years from now. And if any of them give birth here, their children are, US citizens. So that's the issue. What does the 14th Amendment mean? And that's a very hot button issue because you have all sorts of problems. You have, birthright tourism, where people fly here specifically to give birth here so their child is an American citizen, then they fly back home. There's a whole birthright tourism industry, and that seems grossly unfair. But is it constitutional? That is the case. The issue before the Supreme Court yesterday was much narrower. It had to do with uh, nationwide injunctions issued by multiple district courts barring Trump's executive order prohibiting the government from accepting essentially birthright citizenship. So Trump signed an executive order and said, I am instructing the federal government not to recognize on various forms and paperwork the citizenship of people born here to mothers who are illegally in the country, um, or temporarily here. That would be like the birthright citizenship, the birthright tourism, unless the father is lawfully in the United States and a permanent resident or a citizen. So it's a little complicated, but under the executive order, as long as one of the parents was a US citizen, and the child is born here and they're not here illegally, then you become a citizen. So it scales it back dramatically. It would get rid of the issue of someone crossing the border and a month later giving birth and that child crossing the border illegally. That substantive merits issue was not actually in front of the court. It was only what district courts could do on injunctions, but it was hanging over everything. I mean, it was a strange procedural posture that we're taught. Everybody knows why we're here, but technically that's not why we're here. We're talking about procedure. And that certainly infused the dialogue of Justice Sotomayor and Kagan and Jackson. My favorite part of the whole argument was when Chief Justice Roberts, I believe it was, basically told Sotomayor to shut up. She was so hot on the bench that she would not allow the government's lawyer to literally she'd ask a question and then not let him finish and start and the Chief Justice at one point said, I would like to be able to hear his answer to your question, or to somebody else's question. Another justice would ask a question and then she would jump in before he could even answer. She was very hot under the collar on that bench, about, and kept saying things like, well, of course, what Trump did is completely illegal. There's no question about that. But of course, there is a question about that. The 14th Amendment birthright citizenship has been treated as settled law, but it's not really settled law. There is no Supreme Court case, contrary to what Justice Sotomayor suggested, which says that somebody illegally, the child of someone illegally in the country is a US citizen. There's no Supreme Court case that says that. There is a Supreme Court case that everyone cites for a Chinese immigrant couple who gave birth here, but they were in the country lawfully. They were permanent residents at that time. But people have treated it, particularly Democrats, as, oh yes, of course, anyone born on our soil is an American citizen. And that may not be the law. That may not be the intention behind the language in the 14th Amendment. And so the question is, how is that case going to get to the Supreme Court? And that was a lot of the dialogue in the oral argument, was like, we know why we're here, but it's not really why we're here. How are we going to actually get this case and decide this issue? There was a lot of discussion. So it's a very strange posture. I think that what the Trump administration did, they could have brought the merits to the Supreme Court. And I think the Supreme Court would have taken it on the merits. They only brought the procedural issue because the Trump administration thinks this is a good case for whatever reason, better than maybe some others, for the Supreme Court to rule on whether a district court judge can issue what's called a national injunction. Some people refer to it as a universal injunction, which is an injunction which affects thousands or millions of people who aren't litigants in the court. They're not parties in the case. They have no chance to be heard. And that has been the bane of the Trump administration's existence, both in term number one, but particularly term number two. The way I phrase it is, in these cases, because any single district court judge currently feels empowered to issue a national injunction, freezing everything the Trump administration does on a particular issue everywhere as to everybody. Trump administration needs to win every single case. The opposition only needs to win once. They only need one national injunction. Trump needs to win every single one of them. And he is winning a lot of these cases, but so many are being brought. I think we're approaching or over 300 at this point, that the other side only needs to win one. So that's really the issue. And what's happening is, because the district courts, or some of the district courts, have been so out of control, the administration is constantly now going to the Supreme Court seeking emergency stays. And that creates work for the Supreme Court. They're not happy about that. Multiple people cited during the argument, I think both lawyers and justices, that since the inauguration, there have been 35, there have been, I think, 40, I might be slightly off, but I'm close, 40 national injunctions against the Trump administration. 35 of them come from just 5 judicial districts. So what the opposition is doing, they're going to Rhode Island. Whoever heard of Rhode Island District Court doing anything of significance? But a lot of these injunctions are in the District of Rhode Island because they have very friendly judges here. A lot of them are in Massachusetts, District of Columbia. So basically what they're doing is they're forum shopping, and they're going to districts where there are, all of the judges have been appointed by Democrats and are friendly. And so that's the issue. How, I've been saying really since early February, the Supreme Court needs to clamp down on this, okay? We can't have it that an administration can't function if any one of several hundred district court judges can stop everything on a moment's notice, nationally, universally. And people said, well, how are they going to do it? Well, this is the opportunity to do it, and we'll see if they take it.
No, those are all great points. I mean, I know in a past life when I worked in immigration law, I dealt with a lot of what they call the dreamer situation, based, and the name came from the DREAM Act, which is just, I hate how they do that with words, right? And those were the kids whose parents who showed up, had them here. These kids had never been to their home country ever, but they had no legal status in the US. So then what do you do with them? They're not able to apply for certain things because they're not a citizen. They have no valid status. So then you have to create all of these other conditions and opportunities. Well, then, of course, that rubs Americans the wrong way, because then resources that should be going to American citizens are now being reallocated to these other kids. On the other hand, I'm always sympathetic, at least to the situation of the children, because we grew up overseas. And, when my parents put me on a plane, I wasn't sitting there saying, but what is my immigration status when we arrive? Like those, you go where your parents take you. So but there has to be at some point, especially with the immigration situation as it has been, and as the Biden administration created, there has to be an end to this trickle of allowance for all kinds of illegal and extra legal activity, whether it's in simply crossing the border, or in refugee status, or in all of these parts of our law that have been wrongfully exploited for purposes other than their intention. And so I'm very curious to see how this shakes out. Um, I do think there will be much wailing and gnashing of teeth if there are restrictions put on birthright citizenship. But I'm glad it's something that they're having to contend with finally, and I'm very curious to see how that shakes out. And I definitely think that the Supreme Court does not want to touch this. They seem to not have any interest in it and have tried to avoid it for quite a bit. And I don't know. I think it'll be. I'm actually very interested in that one. So I'm going to defer to you on our next topic because it is not something I have had a chance to follow this week. Trump's trip to the Middle East and how that went. Um,
So Trump went to Saudi Arabia, uh, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. I'm not sure what the order was. I know Saudi Arabia was first. I'm not sure if United Arab Emirates was next or Qatar was next. I think he's on his way home, not 100% sure. And, it was kind of classic Trump. He went over there to sign business deals. And the business deals were getting these countries, very, very wealthy oil sheikdoms, to agree to purchase weapons from the United States. So this was a big boon. Hundreds of billions of dollars is going to flow to U.S. defense industry contractors for missiles and airplanes and who knows what else, and drones, to agree to invest in um, energy and other resources in the United States, and to essentially uh, commit to creating jobs in the US. So it's very interesting that, that's Trump. He, I believe, is touting the figure, and I think it's probably close to correct that, a trillion, these states have agreed to spend $1 trillion in the United States in the next 10 years. Now, how much would they have spent anyway, despite this? Maybe they would have spent a lot, but that's how Trump, the businessman, is handling it. He also went there to advance the Abraham Accords. And there weren't negotiations necessarily, and at least not publicized, but to kind of jawbone people how he's looking forward. The Abraham Accords, the UAE is part of it already. It's the agreement that was reached between Israel under Trump administration #1 and a couple of other Arab countries to normalize relations and trade. And Trump's hope is that that will happen with Saudi Arabia. The sticking point there is the Saudis have made clear they're not going to normalize with Israel unless a Palestinian state is created. Israel says, we're not doing that. We tried that. We gave them Gaza, and look what happened. Okay. We're just not doing that. And anybody who's been to Israel, the most amazing thing about it is how small it is. People,
mhm.
only read about Israel in the newspaper or on TV. You'd think it's like the size of Texas. Okay. It's not. It's the size of New Jersey. Okay. It's tiny. I've been on the Judea and Samaria, frequently referred to as the West Bank. That is the high ground overlooking the coastal plain. When you're on the West Bank, in the hills on the West Bank, you can see all of Israel's population basically. Okay,
Mhm.
Israel is not giving up that territory. It's not creating Hamasistan, you know, on the West Bank. It's bad enough in Gaza in the south, where at least you have some sort of desert buffer, and you know it's not far. It's only probably an hour drive to Tel Aviv, but it's still an hour drive from the West Bank. It's 10 minutes. Okay, Israel prior to the 67 war at its narrowest point was 8 miles wide. Think about that. That's the distance between, I don't know what the distance it's like, that's from like one highway in Houston to another highway. I mean, it's not even like measurable. It's so small.
Right.
Okay.
I was gonna
But
say,
it's like,
I'm
I
thinking
would look
about
at
this
Trump
mileage-wise. Yeah.
a unit of measurement. There's no unit of measurement that really uh, tells you that. And so Israel was very vulnerable. They're just not going back to it. They tried it. They tried it with the Oslo Accords. They tried it by pulling every Jew out of Gaza in 2005, including graves, were relocated. Okay, and look what happened. So that's the sticking point. You know, multiple Arab states are saying we understand it's in our interest to have trade with Israel and normalize things, but we're not going to do it because we're afraid of basically what's referred to as the Arab street. We're afraid of how people will react if it does not include a Palestinian state. So that's the impasse. Trump's trying to work it through. I don't know if he'll be successful, but that's the impasse. And so that's his trip. I think it was very successful. Um, Very interestingly, he also met. I don't know if they had discussions, but he did meet, I guess, the self-appointed new ruler of Syria, the former, I think it was ISIS, terrorist leader, who's now, his group captured Syria with the help of Turkey, and indirectly the help of Israel, because Israel eliminated Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed proxy, which was protecting the Syrian regime. But basically, this guy who used to be a terrorist, he was like, I think there was a $10 million bounty on him from the United States. But you know what? That's history, you know. And although a lot of people are saying you shouldn't be dealing with this guy, he hasn't changed his stripes. He may not have changed his stripes, but I think it's worth giving a chance. I think it's worth giving a chance. And the issue there is Trump said, I am going to propose that we lift sanctions that we have on Syria, which would allow a lot of Arab countries and other countries to help rebuild Syria. I mean, people don't realize, because it doesn't get the headlines that Israel has. I mean, I think there's north of 500,000 people who died in the Syrian civil war. I mean, the murder on a scale that makes what's happening in the Israel Hamas conflict look like nothing. Okay. What happened in Syria was so unbelievable, um, that it's really defies imagination, and brutal. I mean, just beyond brutal and horrible. And so uh, that's it. And but he did say the precondition to lifting the sanctions on Syria, you have to join the Abraham Accords and you have to normalize relations with Israel. And I don't know if they're going to be willing to do that, but they might. I mean, this guy is not beholden to the normal forces, international forces, and he may stay. And there's going to be a sticky issue. Will Syria give up its claims to the Golan Heights, which Israel captured in 1967, and which the U.S. recognizes as part of Israel? International community does not. Are they going to give that up? Because just like the West Bank overlooks the coastal plain, so does the Golan Heights overlooks all of northern Israel. And I've been there, and you look at it and it's mind-boggling, how far you can see. You can basically almost see to the Mediterranean from the Golan Heights. It's so high. And so those are the issues. I think it was a very successful trip. It was Trump being Trump. I think, a lot of people are saying, oh, you're being too friendly, you're naive, whatever. Um, but I think this is a moment with Hezbollah having been defeated. I mean, it still exists, but it's defeated. The Hamas having been defeated. I mean, it still exists, but it's defeated. Iranian influence throughout the region, because of Israel's military, has been scaled so far back that there are opportunities. And I think Trump is right to see if he can seize those opportunities, because Iran is the big villain in the Middle East by
They
far.
always have been. Yeah, they always have been, and it's largely why for the longest time states like Syria and Lebanon found themselves on state sponsors of terror, is because they allowed Iran to funnel things through their countries. They turned a blind eye. They were complicit. They might not be actively working with them, but they certainly allowed Iran to do all kinds of terrible things. But I mean, Trump is a businessman. He's not a politician first and foremost. And so his approach to diplomacy is not a traditional approach to diplomacy. It's, he would rather get everyone at the table to hash out some kind of agreement and get everyone to sign on the dotted line than be concerned about who's done what worse, you know. And I don't think that's a bad approach. It seems to, at least in his first term, and at least so far in the second term, to work much better for him than anything else that anyone has done before him. And has made it very obvious that it is possible to get countries to agree on things. I think there's been a lot of money made over the decades for acting like certain agreements will never be possible. And some won't be. I mean, because the dirty secret is that Palestinians, if we even want to call them that, don't want to have their own state, because then they lose all kinds of foreign aid. They just want to be victims and complain. No one in the Middle East wants them, because everywhere they go, they just destroy everything. Um, so his approach to this being a little bit different, ultimately, I think, of the paths available, is going to reap far more decent results than any typical American diplomacy.
Yeah, I mean, he's often described as transactional, not ideological, and he's really not ideological. He's more transactional, and if he can get deals done, he's going to get them done. Whether he will, I don't know. Obviously, Israel is very cautious because, in one sense, they've seen this movie before with groups that supposedly were going to shift from radical to moderate and didn't.
Right.
And the notion of a Palestinian state at this point in time, I just don't think it's on the table. It's on the table in the minds of Western Europe. It's on the table in a lot of international minds, but it's asking Israel to commit suicide. I mean, the issue with the Palestinians is they don't want their entire culture, since even before Israel was officially a state, has been not to create anything of their own, but to deprive the Jews of a state. I mean,
Yes.
that is the ancient Jewish community in Hebron was massacred in 1929. Okay, 20 years before Israel was a state. Okay, the boycotts that we hear about started before Israel was even a state. So they had a chance in 1947 when the UN General Assembly proposed the partition plan that the Jews accepted and the Arabs did not. Of course, at that time, they didn't call themselves Palestinians. They viewed themselves as part of the larger Arab world. I mean, this is a discussion. We should probably have a whole podcast just on this history because people don't
Yeah.
know it,
No, I
which
think that would be
is,
great.
that up until the mid 1960s, the people who now identify as Palestinian simply identified as Jordanian or Egyptian or part of the larger Arab world. The Palestinian nationalism, as we know it now, was a creation of the KGB, the Soviet secret police, because they saw it as a means of separating the Arab world from the US because the US backed Israel after 1967. And so it's a fabrication at every level. In 1964, the first Palestinian National Charter. So this was before Israel captured the West Bank and Gaza. Gaza was controlled by Egypt, and the West Bank was controlled by Jordan. The 1964 First Palestinian National uh, Charter disavows any territorial claim to those areas. So the areas that once the Jews captured them, the Palestinians said, "Oh, that's our homeland." They never claimed as their homeland when Muslim nations controlled them. The whole thing is the greatest historical, certainly the greatest modern historical fabrication. Um, and we'll have to see where it goes. But there were a lot of predictions that Trump was going to sell Israel out on this trip, that he was going to announce plans for a Palestinian state. None of that happened. That was just
Yeah.
BS leaking, um, to Arab media, probably from Qatar, which is behind a lot of this.
Yes.
And none of that happened. That and so that's what's going on in the Middle East.
It is always a lot. That's never
Yeah.
just a small little package to open there. um, so something I do know a lot about, inflation coming down, egg prices coming down, and CNN's delusion about all of it.
Yeah, I mean, people need to know that Kimberly is a chicken and egg farmer. She profited tremendously when egg prices. She's one of those egg gougers. She's I'm just
I think
joking.
we
You
have
don't sell them
sold.
commercially, do you? You don't sell them like
No,
commercially.
no. So, I keep telling my kids we could get something up and running, but we love our birds and we just give them all away. We don't ever sell them. Someone asks for eggs, I'm just like, sure, here, take a dozen. Do you need another? We have plenty. So we're egg givers. In this time of hardship and inflation, it's just something I like to do. And
Yeah.
so yeah, we give them
So,
away.
the big Democrat talking point was Trump promised to lower egg prices. This is like 3 days after he took office. They're nonstop talking about, oh, I haven't seen the egg prices come down yet. He promised he would lower egg. This is like 3 to 4 days after he took office because
I
egg
know.
prices spiked over the fall into the early winter. Um, and the prices are dropping now. Okay. They're dropping
Right.
rather significantly, not back to where they were, a year ago or 2 years ago, but they've dropped significantly. Now the media not only doesn't want to talk about it, but when they do talk about it, they treat that as like it's a bad thing. And CNN had some weird headline that, Trump's, prediction of falling egg prices was a fabrication, but now that it's happened, it's not necessarily a good thing. Okay. I mean, it
I
was
know.
some crazy headline. And Yeah, prices are dropping. The latest inflation report, I'm fairly certain, showed very low inflation. Um, this is like a nightmare for Democrats.
It
Okay.
is. It is.
The
Things are
country
changing a few months
succeeding
in.
is their worst possible thing. And, good jobs report in, I think it was April, maybe it was early May, whenever that
Mhm.
last jobs report, stronger jobs report than predicted, lower inflation, egg prices dropping. We need to keep Democrats away from open windows and scissors and sharp objects. Because,
It's
you
so
know,
funny. Well, so my daughter, who is 8, I think had overheard enough, and we don't even watch the news unless you're on. They always want to see your Fox appearances. But we don't watch the news. I don't listen to the news. I stopped that a long time ago. I read the news because I don't want anyone yelling at me about anything. But even with that, had heard enough to keep, and she's been asking ever since Trump was inaugurated, are groceries cheaper yet, Mom? Are they cheaper yet? Has he made them cheaper yet? Are eggs cheaper? Because she's heard just like this is like such consistent messaging. I'm going, well, these things just take time. We didn't end up with groceries prices quadrupling overnight, and the prices aren't going to come down overnight. And, there's a lot of different factors at play. And then we had to talk
No,
about executive authority and how we don't want anyone with enough power to just command the egg prices decrease either, because that's a whole other world of problem.
yeah.
But
I mean,
they have been
other
so
than eggs,
consistent in their messaging.
other than eggs, I've not really seen grocery prices drop. I mean, I don't measure it. I don't like watch, just kind of
Right.
casual.
They
I did
haven't.
notice
They haven't.
I shop at BJ's, which is like a Costco that's big in the Northeast. And I did buy some burger the other day and I realized it had gone up $1 a pound.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and since the last time I noticed, it had gone up $1 a pound. Eggs have dropped, not all the way back, but they have come down. I've seen that. And I haven't really, I don't, it's not like I track this, I don't measure it, but I notice things from time to time.
Right.
I bought a bag of apples this morning, um, and it was a 4 pound bag, not a 5 pound
Right.
bag.
Same price though. Same price.
Okay. Same price. And there were other bags of 5 pound, but what I'm saying is I don't think grocery prices, but gas has dropped for sure. I mean, it's in the Northeast. I forget what I'm paying lately. 265, 270, 275, something like that. So that's
That's
down
cheap for
significantly.
up there. Yeah, that's cheap for up there.
And that will show up in grocery and other prices because
It will.
transportation is a lot of the cost of what we buy for things.
Yes. Freight, especially if things are imported, has a massive part in the downstream price. Not to get in
The,
too deep into the economics weeds here, but
the, the other big disappointment that big media has is that the tariffs have not yet translated to increased prices. They're
I
like
know they're
five.
so upset about this.
They're very upset about that. A couple of headlines I've seen basically saying, tariffs have not yet impacted, prices. It's like, okay, why are you upset about that? That's a good
This should
thing.
be a good thing for the consumer, but I mean, ultimately, the
And the
tariffs
whole
are
thing
far
about
more.
this, you ruined my retirement. How many?
Yeah.
Well, stock market's basically back to even for the year.
It's like there's one bounce in one day and everyone's losing their minds as though they've never,
Yeah,
ever, ever paid any attention to any of the markets.
yeah,
And the
yeah,
fact that these things happen sometimes. And the tariffs were not, I mean, they were not so much for the tariff. They were, of course, a massive bargaining chip to signal to these countries that he is serious and
yes.
that he needs cooperation, otherwise this is the consequence of not
Yeah.
cooperating in the ways in which he expects cooperation. So it was never meant to be wholly punitive. It was meant to get people to pay attention and snap to it. And of course there's a handful of countries, China, yeah, obviously, and what they've done to so much of our industry, and we've been complicit in that in many ways too. But overall, it wasn't they're not tariffs for tariff's sake. It's the way they're always levied, just as a political bargaining chip. And so far, like you said, everyone has been immune from the consequences of it, and which is why I laugh sometimes. I've seen a couple retailers, because I don't buy a whole lot from, I have all my little places that I buy stuff from, and some of them are pretty crunchy, and because many are pretty crunchy, many are pretty like raging liberal. Just kind of seems to go together, not always but sometimes. Anyway, and there have been a handful of places that have said that because of the tariffs that they're going to have to raise prices and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, but nothing has kicked in. How, what a scam you're pulling here. So then of course I don't buy the thing. But anyway, I think it's really amusing, I think, to watch all of this play out too. And what's interesting to me too is with this whole egg price thing, there's a lot of speculation about why they became so expensive. I mean, I figured it was because the federal government went in and killed all the chickens, you know, and it takes, depending on the breed of chicken, from the time they're hatched, at least 8 months, sometimes 12, before they'll start laying eggs. So you have to replenish the sources here. And of course, some breeds lay more frequently than others. Not every chicken lays an egg every day. There's just a lot to it, but yes, eggs, we love them, and my little family goes through it probably at least a dozen eggs a day. And I don't know that we save any money because whoever had this idea that if you have chickens, somehow your eggs are going to be cheaper. I have not specifically sat down and put the pencil to it, but I can assure you that I pay a lot more per dozen than
Yeah,
than what I would if I bought it from the store. Do what?
chickens eat and need care.
They do. They need care and they get into things and and then your children leave the garage door open and you go walking through early one morning and there's 5 chickens in the garage laying an egg. So, it's just it just is what it is. But they are very good and at least I know that they're getting all good stuff. So, anyway. And some of them are blue and the kids really like the blue eggs especially. So but to move on, assassination culture. I mean, we've seen this since before Trump's reelection, the violent rhetoric that we've seen over and over and over again that led to, or at least contributed to a handful of assassination attempts against Trump himself, um, is becoming a very, very big problem. And the thing is, the consequences of this kind of rhetoric never impact the people spreading the rhetoric. So, do you want to talk a little bit about when we started to see that, what that's looking like, and how it's really gained in prominence, especially over the last several months?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the whole Antifa phenomenon is moved us there. The violence, the black bloc, I think they're called, attacking people, but it's Trump derangement syndrome now on steroids. You know, the assassination attempt against him. We know there are a lot of people in this country who were hoping it succeeded. We're
Yes.
disappointed that it didn't. Okay. Um, and I remember somebody I know from high school on Facebook when that happened, not being willing to come out and say it right, but posted, "Are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Okay. Or words to that effect. And everybody knew what he was thinking.
Right.
Okay. No, no. We saw it against Brett Kavanaugh, where he almost was assassinated. Some guy, the Democrats have been whipping people into absolute hysteria, at least since Trump term number one, over abortion, over other issues. Chuck Schumer standing on the steps of the Supreme Court. You'll catch the whirlwind, Kavanaugh, if you
Mm-hmm.
vote to overturn Roe v. Wade. I mean, the Democrat strategy has been to whip their core, their base, into an absolute frenzy that this is the end of democracy. Trump is literally Hitler. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when you do that year after year after year, you encourage people who may be mentally unstable, who may be down on their luck, to take violent actions. We saw it, and then the greatest manifestation of it was with the guy who shot the United Healthcare executive. He's now a hero on the left. He's celebrated, and so we're seeing this more and more, and it's very dangerous, and it's become part of the culture of the resistance, so to speak. I literally I don't really spend time on Facebook posting stuff, but I do it just to watch because it's kind of my generation is still on Facebook, not the younger generation, and people are losing their minds. They are buying into the social media posts and the doom and gloom and the end of the world rhetoric that is coming nonstop from the Democrat side. And I think, what we're talking about is that nod, nod, wink, wink, get Trump. And what brought it to the news today is James Comey. You remember him, the FBI
Yes.
director, who tried to set Trump up on his first couple of days in office, and posting something on social media that I think it said 8747, or was it 89? I forget what it was, 86, whatever. But the first two digits were like a code word for getting rid of somebody. Okay. And some people have said it's murder. Some have said just get him out of office, whatever. But why is he posting that? why is he doing that when the obvious interpretation of it could be to a lot of people, nod, nod, wink, wink, Trump needs to be assassinated. Um, and the Secret Service and the Department of Justice and the FBI are now looking into that. And of course, Comey saying, "Oh, I thought those were just numbers. I didn't know what it was." Um, but he's playing into this assassination culture that they will do anything to get Trump. And if they can't get Trump, they're going to get somebody else. And it's a very dangerous time we're entering into, where you have a population being whipped into a frenzy, being told we're practically Nazi Germany, being told that Hitler's running the country, and you've got to do something. We cannot
Yeah.
sit silently by while he does this to our country. I mean, I've seen other people, it's just insane. So we're entering into an assassination culture in the Democratic Party where they have been so convinced it's the end of the world. And you did not see this when Biden was in office. Yes, people didn't like what he was doing. People were angry, but you didn't see this assassination culture when Biden was in office. This is a derivation of Trump derangement syndrome, and it's very dangerous.
Oh, it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, as I mentioned, I think it's at least contributed to some of the assassination attempts. I mean, he had his ear blown off. This was not something that was just Facebook posting. This has become very, very dangerous. Who's it? Rand Paul has dealt with encounters in front of his house, but I mean that of course is the goal by the people who further this kind of rhetoric, is they want there to be some kind of physical violence. Because anytime, and this goes back to much of what Alinsky wrote, which is that if you can create division, then you can capitalize off of the division, and you can jump in and seize control in ways that you can't during times of peace. And so it's just such it's so frustrating to watch. It's frustrating to watch too, just how things have changed culturally. Even since I was younger, when we didn't deal with any of these issues, racism was 100% fabricated and then shoved into the schools, because these were not things that my generation considered or dealt with or anything like that. Everyone got along, and I'm not to minimize the fact that yes, there's always going to be some minority contingent who engages in these types of things, um but for the most part, we just didn't have these problems. And so it was 100% astroturfed. And again, the whole point is control, but it's not funny, and it's not fun and games, because it's getting people injured, it's getting people killed. But we also have, as part of this, a culture that has no value for life, where they treat abortion, which, in my view and the view of many other people, is the ending of a life, as just a mere medical procedure. I mean, you can go to Walgreens and get a pill, and it's just that simple. And so we've been detached from the sanctity of human life, and life has been devalued. And once you're able to successfully make that idea become mainstream, then you can bring in this other piece of extremism that says that someone's terrible and we need to kill him, and haha, it's so funny, but everyone would be better if we just, if this were to happen. And it's truly alarming, because the last thing we need is for this to become more mainstream. And I'm not sure where that leads us, but I am glad at least that we have some kind of leadership that will deal with these things and will issue consequences that need to be issued, because there's certain things you don't play with, just for the same reason that there's even limitations on our speech. Everyone knows, like, you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater, right? You can't and should not
Unless
be
there's a fire. Unless there's a
unless there's a
fire.
fire, right? But you cannot, exactly, but you cannot and should not be joking about assassinating public figures as though this is for the betterment of everyone, because that's completely in opposition to the way our governance is supposed to work, which is governance by choice. And not just because one person gets a burr up their butt and goes and takes matters into their own hands. Like, we haven't done that in a long time. So we've had these stable systems, we've had these stable cultures and societies that are at risk of being destabilized because of this kind of rhetoric. So, anyway, on that positive note, if I could get if I could get just, in 30 seconds, what are your thoughts on Trump's first 4 months in office, which honestly, like, it feels like it's already been a decade since January, because when we're starting off and I'm saying, "Howdy, it's May 16th," I'm going, How is it only May 16th?" But your quick thoughts on his last 4 months into a second term.
First 4 months of Trump's second term have been shock and awe, and I think it's been very successful overall. He needs to focus now on making these changes permanent, and the way you do that is through legislation. So at some point, executive orders are just not enough, because a future Democratic president can reverse them very easily. And a lot of judges are trying to hold them up, saying it exceeds his authority. So I think very impactful, very successful first 4.5 months. Now needs to focus on keeping that momentum, but also turning it into something more permanent.
No, I completely agree. That was my 30 seconds were going to be the fact that I'm very irritated with the legislator for not having taken action so far. The administration has clearly signaled where they stand on a handful of issues based on the executive orders that they've issued. But the legislator has taken zero action. And the thing is, we have no guarantee of what midterms are going to render, and whether or not Republicans will continue to hold the majority in the House. And the thing is, they're not trying and failing. They're not even trying. And I don't, for the life of me, understand why that is, because the administration has their hands full with the lawfare. And so they need action on the legislative side to get something on the desk so he can sign it and codify these things that he's actively trying to change. So if by some chance you are a legislator or legislative aide, tell them to get off their butts and put something together, anything. Just let's get this thing moving. Lastly, I'm very excited. So Sunday we do have an online event, which is free to attend, and we'll be discussing. We have a really great panel. I'll be hosting. Professor Jacobson, of course, will be joining us, as will Glenn Reynolds, who's also a law professor at the University of Tennessee's Law School. You may know him as Instapundit. And then we have Will Chamberlain, who will be joining us as well. And we will be discussing Article 2 versus Article 3 powers and the ongoing war between the executive branch and all the lawfare. So it'll be a very good event. I know I did not pitch that well. I'm also undercaffeinated, so please forgive me. But it's going to be a really great discussion. I'm very excited about it. And we have just a great panel. We do take questions, as many as we can, so it is interactive, at least in part. But I love these events and that we're able to host them because we're able to get really knowledgeable people. I always learn a lot through the discussion, not just in what I hear from our panelists, but even through the questions that are asked by people in attendance. And so we'll be sure to put that link in with all of the links that we typically include. That way you can find it and register. Pre-registration is required because you'll be sent a link, and to get the link, you have to register, but there is no cost. So we hope that you'll join us for that. And on that note, thank you for joining us for our 27th podcast, and we look forward to being back and talking to you again soon.